So we're now here on Daf Chesamid Beis, on the second line, and the Gemara tells us a story at the end of which will be Mechadish Ha'aloch and Hilchas Nidu. Ravina Havile Nidro L'Debeise. His wife, that's called the Besu, took a neder, and that neder fits into that very circumscribed category of Nedarim, which the Baal has no control over. It's beyond his purview of Hafaras Nidre Ishto, because only a neder that has what's called Inui Nefesh, or what we call Dvarim Shebeino Leveina, those are the Nedarim that the Torah engraves, or shall we say, defines as those Nedarim under which the Baal has authority to be made. But here, Ravina's wife took a neder that goes beyond that circle of Nedarim, which are Inui Nefesh or Dvarim Shebeino Leveina. Now, there's another possibility here to interpret this story, which Tosas brings down, that it could be that Ravina heard about his wife's neder, and the law is that he has to be made for the neder b'yom shamo, and the yom shamo passed. He wasn't made for the neder. He didn't exercise his authority to null and void his wife's neder, and now it becomes a kiyum neder. But Ravina changed his mind. Now he wants to be mad to the neder. Also, Lakami de Ravashi, Ravina shows up in front of Ravashi. If I cannot exercise my authority to be made for the neder, well, there's also something called hataras neder, in which the person who took the neder, shows up in the presence of a chacham, a baki, or shlosha idiotos, or three regular Jews that form a tribunal. He mentions the neder, and he tells and notifies the chacham or the shlosha idiotos what motivated him to take that neder, and now he has charata, and he wants to be matir the neder. And now Ravina asks Ravashi, can I represent my wife and show up in front of a chacham or sholosh idiotos to express the charata for the neder and achieve a hataras nedarim? And this is a specific question with regard to a Baal. No one else can appear on your behalf if you're a noder in front of the sholosh idiotos or the chacham to be matir neder. You have to come personally. But with regard to a Baal, there's a principle called ishto kigufa. So there's no shlichus for charata. The noder has to show up in front of the matir, and he has to express his charata and formulate it in their presence. There's no shlichus for that. But in the case of Baal, this was the svara of Ravina. We could apply the principle of ishto kigufo, and therefore I can represent my wife for hataras nedarim through a charata. Amalei, Rav Ashi responds to Ravina, Imachafnin id v'lo lo. If he happens to find three people who are together, he didn't gather them, then yes, a Baal can represent his wife in their presence for charata to achieve hatar. But ilo, if he doesn't find three people, but he actively gathers them together, lo, we're not going to be makil, we're not going to be lenient, and allow the husband to deliberately, b'miyuchad, for the purpose of hatar, to gather together the three people. Because the best way of achieving hataras nedarim through charata is when she herself, as an oderes, would show up personally in front of Beis Din, and they will sort of investigate her das until they're convinced that she was mischarit and she doesn't want the neder. Now I'm trying to remember way back when I heard from Rav Soloveitchik a difference between charota and what's called toes. Let me try to see if I can reconstruct it. Oh yeah, toes means that there was something that I was unaware of that existed at the time that I took the neder, and I wasn't aware of it. Had I been aware of that, of X, I never would have taken the neder. That's called hataras nedarim through toes. The chiddush of charata is that I was aware of everything at the time that I took the neder. There was no mistake in the neder itself. But now, at some point subsequently, I have charata. I realize that I'm suffering tremendously from this neder, and I can't, ani lo yachol lamod b'zeh. That's called charata. So chatchila, to achieve charata, the person who took the neder should show up personally in front of this tribunal of three or in front of the chacham. They will investigate until they're convinced that the person cannot tolerate the neder. So let's say, for example, I don't know if this is a good example, a person is addicted to smoking and he takes a neder that he won't smoke. And he's aware of the fact that that's difficult for him to break his addiction to smoking, but he thinks he can do it. And then with the passage of time, he realizes that he's fooling himself. There's no way he can stop from taking the cigarette into his mouth. He's addicted. That's called charut. In the case of Baal Ki'ishto, will be mekil and will allow for sort of a lower echelon kind of hataras nedarim, that if he finds three people and they're already gathered, he'll say to them, look, I represent my wife and I express hacharah. Shma min tlas. The Gemara derives from this story and from the response of Rav Ashi to Ravina's question, three different halachas. Number one, Shma min Baal Nase Shliach Lecharotasi. So yes, in fact, the principle of Ishto Kegufo kicks in here and operates with regard to hataras nedarim through charota, and the Baal can, through his special status, represent his wife to achieve charota in front of the matirin. Number two, Shma mina lo shori lemishrei nidra bi asra derabe. Ravina didn't get together three of his talmidim to be matir the neder of his wife in his own house, so to speak, meaning his own living room. But rather, if they covered a Rav, he wanted to be matir the neder in a place where his Rav was. Because lo shori lemishrei nidra bi asra derabe. You are not allowed to be matir a neder without the reshus of your Rebbe. So go to your Rebbe, and that's where you're going to get reshus from your Rebbe to be matir. It means that hataras nedarim has a quasi status of horas din, and a talmud should not be moreh holacha b'fnei rabbah. Now it seems to me, I don't have a proof for this, that if he asks his Rebbe for reshus, then that's true in horas din, and should be true even in hataras nedarim. That if his Rebbe gives him the license and the okay to go ahead and be matir the neder shalom b'fanav, then he can do so. Shma mina, the third halach that we derive from this story is kima chanfin shapir dami. That only if the Baal finds three hedyotos who are already together, then he can serve as a shliach for his wife and present the charot of his wife to these three people. But if he has to deliberately gather these three people together, then we don't allow him. We want the lechatchila, perfect, ideal way of hataras nedarim through charata, and his wife should show a person. Now the Meiri has a big chiddush over here. We know that Ataras Nedarim can be achieved in one of two ways, either 3 Yotos or 1 Yochid Mumcha. And the Meiri says that the Ataras Nedarim of the Yochid Mumcha has a special status. And therefore you don't require this condition that he's already there. Even if you have to go ahead and knock on his door and seek him out, that's enough in a case of a Yochid Mumcha, and the Baal can serve as a shliach for his wife for Charon. Now the Gemara says the following: although in Ataras Nedarim, second. Right, in Ataras Nedarim, we said that if you're located within the city, let's say where your Rav is, then you have to go to the Rav to get permission to be Mata Neder. However, in Nidui, we're going to be more lenient. The Shamta in Nidui, Afilu Biasra de Rabbi, even if he wants to be Mata and Nidui in the locale of his Rebbe, so his Rebbe is there in that, let's say in that city, he's allowed to be Mata the Nidui. And the reason for that is we don't want to leave a person in a state of Nidui. Even though there's an issue of Kvod Rav, that he should really go to his Rebbe to achieve the Mata Ataras Nidui, but we're going to overlook the Kvod Rav here for the sake of the pressing, urgent need to be Mater and Nidui. Like we discussed yesterday, once you put the Nidui on, you immediately are Mater the Nidui. Now we're going to go back to a discussion that we had on Daf Zayin of the days about Azkar Shem Shamayim Levatola and the severity of that violation. Omar Rab Shimon bar Zvid, Omar Rab Yisrael bar Tabla, Omar Rab Chiyov Arichov Debei Rab Acha, Omar Rab Zera, Omar Rab Elazar, Rab Chanina, Omar Rab Mashio, Mishmeid, Rab Yehuda bar Eloi. So ultimately we go back to Rab Yehuda bar Eloi. My dichsiv, what's the meaning of a pasuk at the end of Tanakh? Malachi per Gimel. V'zarcha lachem yirei shmi shemesh staku marpei ben chafel. We're talking about the power of the sun for yirei shmi, for those who are careful and fearful and have a reverence for the name of God. The Yirei Shemi refers to those who are very, very careful about not mentioning the name of the Almighty Levatol in vain. And what's the schar in this world, the Olam Hazeh, for being Yirei Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's the Shemesh that will be for them Tzedakah Umarpeh. It will be a healing refuah. It's the power of the sun to bring about refuah. So the Maharsha adds something here. He says that Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yisod Kiyum HaOlam. That the name of God is what perpetuates the existence of the world. Motzi Shem Alavatola really destroys the entire structure of the world. Kaviyachol, it weakens that power of Hanhaga from above that keeps the world going. If someone is careful and meticulous not to be Motzi Shem Shemayim Latola, he's really in effect continuing the Hanhagas HaOlam. And that expresses itself in the celestial Galgalim. How do you say Galgalim in English? The planets and the bodies, like the sun, the moon, the stars, etc., etc. So within the Bria, there's a Teva, there's a nature in the Bria, says the Maharsha, that you masake the Bria by being careful about the name of God, which keeps the Bria going. And if the Shemesh, which plays a role of marpe. Now, by virtue of the fact that you were careful about enunciating the name of God only in a proper way when it's absolutely necessary and justified, therefore the Shemesh will be absolutely functional in its nature for which it was created to bring about marpe. Amar Abai, Shma Mina, I derive from Yehuda Bar Ilai, Chirga de Yoma Masi. What's Chirga de Yoma? He translates it here based on the Ran. Havak hanira bekarne hashemesh b'shashin nichnasim derech halom lebeso. If you take a look at a window which is open during the day hours and the sunlight streams in, you will see particles of dust. And Maseh, those particles of avak, of dust, that are a result of the rays of the sun piercing through the window, are merapeis hacholet. They bring about refuah for a cholet. Now, in the footnote here, he quotes the Levushe Mordechai, who says that the Gemara is not talking about cholim in a physiological sense, but rather a spiritual kind of weakness, or let me say it differently, a physical kind of weakness that results from spirituality. And what that means is that there's an inverse relationship. When a person is dedicated to spirituality, his physicality sometimes gets weaker. That's called in the language of the Gemara, Torah mateshes kocho shel adam. That Torah weakens the physical power of a man. But that physical power that was weakened, says Abaye, based on Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, will be strengthened and restored through the particles of dust that receive the sunlight piercing through the window, pliga. And now we're going to have a statement in which Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai is now arguing against Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, meaning, does that pasuk in Malachi of Ezarchel Chamir Shemi, etc., refer to this physical world, the schar, the reward that a person receives in this world, as we saw in Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, or rather it's referring to the next world? The Omar, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Ein Gehenim li Olam Haba, that there's not really, after Tchiyas HaMesim, Lasid Lavo, something called Gehenim. What is it really? It's like a Shpach Motzi Chamim Atika li Olam Haba. God will bring the sun out of its covering. It'll be totally exposed after the Tchiyas HaMesim period of time. And two things are going to happen. Tzadikim nisrapim ba. The tzadikim will achieve a perfect cleansing, a spiritual purification as a result of this sun. This is the light that was dedicated for tzadikim liyosid lovo, perhaps the Aragonus. But Rishonim nidonim ba, that same chama that HaKadosh Baruch will be motzi liyosid lovo in Artika will have a devastating effect on the Rishonim, on the evildoers. Tzadikim misrapim ba. How do we derive, says Rosh Shimon Losh, that liyosid lovo, the schar of olam haba through the sun will be refuah for tzadikim based on this pasuk in Malachi that Rav Yehuda Bar Ilai had quoted earlier. Namely, shenemar v'zarchel lechem yirei shemi shemesh staku marpe b'knofel. So with the zricha of that shemesh liyosid lavo after Tchiyas HaMesim, there will be a refuah v'lo od. And not only will this bring a refuah for the tzaddikim, el shem misadnim ba, misangim ba. So it's not just removing the negative and purifying the dross, but it's also a positive experience of owning, of pure joy and pleasure. And here we see a fundamental difference between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. We would not talk about Tainug as a positive thing in Olam Hazeh, because if you're too involved in Tanugim, then it's going to disturb your concentration, your focus, and dedication to the study of Torah. And that's what Chazal say, Ein HaTorah Miskayeves Al B'Misha Meimis Atzmo Lez Osku Kesatorah Adam Kiyom Mispol. But Yasid Love, it's going to be just the opposite. It will not be a negative factor, but on the contrary, the Tanugim will help him in Limud Torah. And the physicality will be converted and transformed into Ruchnius, into spirituality. But Arishoim Nidonim Bo. However, the Pasuk in Malachi, says Reish Lakish, indicates that that same son, Liyosid Lavo, will be the power to punish the Rishoyim. Shenemar, Hine Hayom, Yom means the day of judgment, Ba, Boer Kitanu, Boyakol Zorim, Boyakol Zaydim, Boyakol Ose Risha Kash. So the Rishoyim, the Zaydim, will become like kash. They will become like straw, which is so flammable that it goes up immediately in smoke. So the Shemesh, that sun of that day, will burn up the Rishoyim. So the same Chama, which the Zricha is for Tzadikim as Stoku Marpe, will serve as the Rishoyim Nidonim Ba, the judgment against the Rishon. And now we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Tes Omer Al. Mirz Hashem will cover this Mishnah tomorrow. Thank you so much.